minutes after the hour. It's almost the end of the month, and you know what that means. Fred Dashevsky joins us from uscoincapital.com. And if you don't have that number memorized like I do, the number is 1-800-878-2646. uscoincapital.com. That's right, friends. Like my Gary Owen? Yeah. Hey, Fred, welcome back. How you doing, sir?
Doing great. Can't believe another month is like whipped by. So we're now 100 days into the new Trump administration. How we doing?
No, that's what I was going to get Murray Sabrin on, and I thought, no, I want Fred. Fred's going to give me the lowdown. Murray Sabrin, he gives me the Mises Institute. We might get him on tomorrow. We'll see.
That's all right.
But here's the thing. I've had several, it's not just Elliott Wave and everybody else that's out there doing their thing. But, boy, there are some warning signs out right now that are saying that the economy could really take a beating if they don't do something about U.S. home sales. What's your take on that?
Well, sure. I mean, home sales are a major part of the U.S. economy. And, of course, that's all predicated on the interest rates because it all comes down to those mortgage payments, right? If they're more affordable, we'll stimulate more activity there. I think the problem is the Fed is being encouraged to lower interest rates, but it may not be a smart move, given that we could be heading into a slower economy. So, when they lower interest rates, it is helpful. It makes those payments cheaper, but it also means that when the government is trying to sell debt, the bond payments are going to be less. Lower interest rates means lower yield on bonds. And as you well know, the government has quite a substantial need to sell a lot of debt.
Yeah, they sure do. Now, what we have some reports out. Zero Hedge this morning is reporting the U.S. Treasury unexpectedly reports a sharp drop in debt borrowing needs, and, of course, the rates slide. And today's Treasury reports are indicating they expect the Treasury to announce a $507 billion in Q2 borrowing. This is obviously not good. I mean, that's over $500 billion.
Or another $500 billion.
Yeah, or another, yeah.
As you like to say. So the Treasury is scheduled to sell about $70 billion in notes today. Another, wow. They sold $70 billion this week, $60 billion more tomorrow, and then they've got $85 and $75 billion on track for the first 2 days of May. So, clearly there is a monstrous amount of debt being pushed out onto the market, and they continue to hope that foreign investors continue to accumulate. And China, of course, is, still holding $800 billion worth of U.S. government debt. And I know a lot of people are fearful that, China might sort of divest themselves of U.S. treasuries. But I think people forget, because China's economy is built on export, if they do support the U.S. dollar, it does strengthen the dollar worldwide. If they don't, and they dump U.S. dollars, well, that will strengthen their currency, the yuan. But that works against them because a stronger yuan hurts their exports. And they're built on an economy of exporting goods. So they actually really do it on purpose to try to keep their own currency weaker. So they're big supporters of the U.S. Treasury markets. But it's getting tricky. Country after country is trying to move away. There was a listing yesterday of 11 countries that are now talking about completely walking away from the U.S. dollar. And although most of them were, Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan, but Russia was in the list, and so was Ukraine. So these are countries.
Are we talking about the Rio reset?
Well, yeah.
Now, the BRICS coalition, right?
Well, this is on top of BRICS. So, except for.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, except for Russia, which is already in the BRICS numbers. Yeah. A lot of these new 11 countries are not part of the BRICS nations. So these are additional countries that are now also sidelining the U.S. dollar and saying, we don't want to have to support the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. And we're going to choose to try to walk away from it and operate independently. And, I am really fearful of this because I think you and I well know that the only support that we have for our currency internally is the fact that foreign investors support our debt. If people move away from the dollar and are choosing to support any alternative, it's going to create the fundamentally largest economic problem the U.S. has ever faced since the end of World War II. If we cannot sell our dollars worldwide, or sustain its world reserve status, we're really in big trouble. So these bond auctions coming up in the next few days are going to be kind of important to see how they fare and how aggressive the buying activity is.
Well, the one thing I do know is I can take stock. Well, I can take stock. I got to do my Reagan on that one. Check this out. This is an MS-65 1881. Is that a Morgan?
That is a Morgan.
Oh man, this is awesome. What do you think these things? Yeah, what do you think these things are worth?
Oh, they're $200 coins. Which actually is pretty impressive when you think about the fact that they're 100 years old in nearly pristine condition. You move up one more grade, they go to, $350, $400. One more grade above that, you're talking $1,000 a coin.
So the difference between that and this AU peace dollar, what are we talking about there?
There you're looking at around $40 a coin or so, because as a slightly circulated coin, it doesn't carry as much of what we call numismatic value or premium. So they tend to sell for a little bit more affordable prices per coin. But they can be just as beautiful. AUs are an interesting grade because that
they are.
Almost uncirculated grade means that they were so close to being mint condition that before the grading services like the one you held up that was in the NGC holder, before that service existed, dealers would house grade, grade their own coins. And these AUs, we used to refer to them as commercial sliders because they look so much like mint condition that they got passed off frequently as MS-63s or 64s because their surface conditions look so pristine. But the reason they're AU is because there is a slight, and I mean really slight, hint of wear. So if you carefully look at your peace dollar and compare it to a mint condition one, you'll notice there is one detail. It could be just a little feather that isn't complete from tip to tip, and that's all it takes. It's like a new car. You drive it off the lot technically, you put 10 miles on it, can't call it new anymore. And any coin that has the slightest hint of wear, no matter how pretty it is or how pristine the surface is, can't be graded higher than AU. So AUs are kind of an interesting grade. You got to move up all the way to 63, 64s to get coins that look as nice, but then of course you're paying 3 times as much money for them.
Well, exactly. And see, this is the thing I like about numismatics is that, they do come in different grades, and there are people who will keep these things and just wait for the price of silver, like gold recently went up. They're going to wait until these things almost double in value before they try to cash in. But here's the problem with that, is if the dollar becomes weaker, no matter how much it's propped up, we're not backed by gold and silver right now. Do you ever see that happening with the United States now, to going back to, intrinsic value backing?
I find it difficult to understand how the mechanics of that would work, because I don't believe that I've seen a Congress in my lifetime that could be functioning if I constrained them to not being able to just print money when they ran out. So if we're going to put us on a gold or silver standard, we're removing this possibility of simply printing your way out of the problem. That means they're actually going to have to sustain, some sort of economic plan that allows for money coming in to equal money going out, or something close to that. Otherwise, you're going to have a real substantial problem, and the gap between, pretend and reality will get wider and wider. So I love the idea of any kind of gold or silver backed currency. I just don't believe that there's a mechanism that affords for the possibility of the U.S. to return to that kind of standard without, really rocking the boat when it comes to what Congress can do. Can you imagine these guys having to actually work on a budget and not be able to, exceed it, and simply say, okay, well, we'll kick the can down the road and raise the debt limit another time and simply print more money to solve our short-term problem, figuring somehow we're going to grow our way out of it, which, to me is fool's folly. So
good luck
love
with
the idea. I just don't think I don't expect it reasonably to occur, because I don't think, in the end, if Congress was finally getting to the point where they had a vote on it, I think if the reality kind of hit them in the face and they said, okay, wait, we're going to agree to this. We're not going to print money without gold or silver. Well, that means there's a limited amount of money we can print.
That's right.
Right? So I don't know. I find that kind of difficult. Although, Judy Shelton has been talking about the idea of a gold bond a 30-year treasury somehow tied to gold, although even she had not really come out with the specifics on that. So there are probably ways to, manipulate something that gives us some credibility. Otherwise, we've had that conversation. You have to sort of scratch your head, and I'm not doing that objectively. What is the value of the U.S. dollar? Why do you and I believe that even has value? And it's because people continue to use it. Well, yeah. They will continue to do so until some other alternative exists. And this is where I come back to this real fear when these countries start lining up. 11 countries, as small as they may be, start representing a group of people who are saying, hey, is there a world under which the U.S. dollar does not reign supreme? And how would the U.S. Treasury deal with the onslaught of money pouring back into the U.S. if people start divesting themselves of U.S. dollar-based securities and we can't sell enough debt to support us? That's going to be problematic.
So you think the tariffs are affecting the way that these bond markets and everything are reacting? I mean, is that because of the tariffs? Because Trump is saying, look, we have the External Revenue Service, folks, $16 billion have come in, and I might just forgive everybody's tax debt. You won't have to file and pay a tax because we'll collect it in tariffs. Wouldn't that be wonderful? I mean, how does that work? How does that work, Fred?
Well, somehow, if you think about it, we didn't have an income tax until 1913, right? It wasn't necessary. The country survived from the 1790s all the way through to 1913 without having to collect an income tax. Now, suspiciously, if you will, the year the income tax was instituted was the same year the Federal Reserve was created. So if you look at what happened is they said, okay, we're going to sub out the job of printing money, give it to this private consortium of bankers, allow them to print capital, pay them for that resource, let them sell that money back to us at interest. And for that, if we only did that and let them print money one way, well, the entire economy would get flooded with cheap money, and before long, its lack of value would become apparent. So they needed a funnel on the back end, which is why they created the income tax. It wasn't because the government needed that revenue. It was because it needed to funnel out the money that was going to be now subsequently printed and eventually printed without a gold or silver backing. So I don't believe that we're going to not have an income tax. I don't think that they'll allow that revenue stream to dissipate because, again, even if they fix everything today, nobody seems to forget about the fact, or nobody should be forgetting about the fact, we still have already $36 trillion worth of debt that has to be addressed.
And how do you do that other than declare a jubilee and the Fed goes, oh, no, you can't do that? I mean, the whole dollar, just down the toilet right then and there. Prophecy News Watch, by the way, has put out an article, 12 alarming indicators that America's consumers are in deep financial trouble. And I want to basically, according to the University of Michigan, this is number one, consumer sentiment in the United States has fallen to the second lowest reading ever recorded, plunging 11% this month. What's your take on that? Why do you think that happened?
That's not good. Okay, so this is coming from what I would call uncertainty. When you have the inability to figure out where the economy is going, people become like the turtle. They crawl back into the shell. They don't want to stick their head out because they're afraid of it might get chopped off. So if you have serious uncertainty, you get a lack of activity. And again, it affects us nationally. It affects countries around the world. So consumer confidence is hugely important because, if the consumer feels optimistic, even if there's a ton of debt going on, they're spending money, and that helps because it keeps the thing chugging forward, right? Keeps lots of cash flow moving through the system. If everybody shuts down and stops spending money, well, now you have the worst of both worlds, right? You have growing debt, and you have nothing happening in an economy. You're stalling. They call that like stagflation, when inflation keeps climbing, but the economy isn't growing enough to absorb it. And that's kind of where we are right now. I'm finding that the fear of recession seems to be waning a bit, but the fear of stagnant and stagflation is growing.
Well, so Number two, according to a new CNBC Survey Monkey poll, a whopping 73% of U.S. consumers admit they are financially stressed. They surveyed 4,200 U.S. adults from April 3rd to the 7th, and this is the result right here. 73% of them said, I'm financially stressed out. Your quick take on that.
Well, that's a large percentage of the public. And again, if that translates into slower consumer activity, this is going to create a bigger and bigger problem moving forward. So look at the reversal of what's happened around the world. Remember, was it 6 months ago or less than a year ago when we had the big port problem in Long Beach, right? All the container ships that were loaded up could not unload because of the strike going on and the slowdown in the economy. Now we have almost the opposite. It's nearly empty at Long Beach, and all of the carrier ships and all of the cargo ships, they're outside of China, hanging out on the coast because they can't export the stuff now as quickly because Trump has used these tariffs against a lot of these products. So suddenly, from where we had so many ships, so many cargo ships ready to unload goods and services, and that was slowing down the economy, now we can't get the ships to move because we're putting tariffs on everything coming out of China, and it's slowing down the export. So that will affect them. It will affect us. We might go through another period. Remember what the empty shelves problem looked like in the middle of COVID.
Yeah.
So we don't want to go through that again.
No, we don't. Here's number three. 67% of Americans feel behind on their savings goals. Behind. Half of U.S. adults believe they'll never reach their savings goals, which is why we have now seen more and more people working past retirement age.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. You think back a generation or two ago, and when we had one person in a family could work a 40-hour work week, make enough money to basically, buy a home and pay for a family vacation once a year and survive well. Now in the modern era, of course, it's about two and a half incomes are necessary for an average family because one person's income just goes to pay all the taxes we have to pay.
Yeah.
So, these slowdowns in this mentality are important. And if people are not meeting their long-term retirement goals and their savings goals, I believe that translates into them also becoming a slower consumer, getting a little tighter, with the wallet and maybe not spending as much money. Anything that's going to slow down our economy right now is going to be problematic. So we're kind of lining up here. If you take it like, planets aligning, it does not look good moving forward for the U.S. dollar. There's an awful lot of pressure between a slowing economy, the Fed's stuck in this position where they're being pressured to lower rates, but they can't go too far. We have this trade problem that's going on around the world that's created so much uncertainty. And meanwhile, the government debt situation is climbing, and these bond sales, volume-wise, are just monstrously huge. And we just have to hope that there are buyers out there.
Well, that's probably the end result of why 63% of people, and this is number 4, with savings account, have withdrawn money since the beginning of this year, primarily for unexpected expenses. 48% of them, everyday necessities. 36%. I mean, that's over a third of the population that even has savings account. The percentage of U.S. credit cards, this is number 5, are at least 90 days past due, has reached the highest level in 12 years. Now, this tells me that people are living on credit cards.
Yep, that's not good. Okay, so number 1, if they're tapping into their savings accounts and actually taking principal off the table because they need the money, that's a horrible sign. If they're living off of the interest on their savings accounts, that's fine. Most retired people will take a small percentage out of principal of their savings from time to time. But what you're saying in terms of statistics is that they're doing that now, not when they're ready to as retirement money. They're doing it out of need to pay current bills. Yep, that does not bode well moving forward.
It doesn't.
And the credit card problem, that's huge. Because if we're living on borrowed time and borrowed money, and that's how people are surviving, again, this is a bad sign for the economy that we're not sustaining enough growth for an average person to feel comfortable, save some money, and actually be able to live off what they're earning, not have to tap into a credit card to pay their mortgage payments.
Right. And number 6 and number 7 all have to do with student loans. 5 million student loan borrowers in the U.S. haven't made a single payment in the last year. 4 million other student loan borrowers will soon reach that status. For the first time in about 5 years, the DOE is going to resume collections of its defaulted federal student loan portfolio. And what people don't understand, this stuff is all securitized paper. There are over 20,000 student loan trusts out there. People have zero idea how to defend against this stuff, which is the reason why I put this on my Substack page. But number 8, this is even scarier. The average credit score in the United States just dropped at the fastest pace since the Great Recession, 2008.
So that means the borrowing cost of money for those people with lower credit scores is going to go up. That means it's going to become more difficult to borrow money at any kind of reasonable pace, and that will just exacerbate the problem of having to borrow. So I think these problems are very, very important, and it's creating an environment that is challenging an average person to try to stay ahead of the curve. You know, we're fortunate in the gold and silver world that we've seen these increasing values, that those people who park money in that form have actually seen good increases. And by the way, right now, and I know we've chatted a little bit about this from time to time, remember we've talked about that relationship between the price of gold and the price of silver, that ratio? It's 100 to 1 right now.
Oh my.
Okay. It was 80 to 1 the last time I saw it, and I thought it was high, and we got a response. Silver did kind of catch up. Now it's back at 100 to 1, which means that either gold is overvalued or silver is undervalued. And I'm picking the latter. I think that's the case. So if anybody wants to try to gain something out of this current environment, buy silver now, because it is ridiculously underpriced relative to where it should be comparative to the rest of the world and the other values, especially if we're going to continue to see the US dollar fade in value and more confidence in the dollar's status is beginning to fade every day. I've never heard in my 40 years more people kind of beginning to understand that concept of the US dollar's world reserve status and how important that is to us as Americans.
That is scary stuff. Number 9 and number 10 kind of go hand in hand. Consumers eating out less as a result. The commercial shoe is dropping in the restaurant industry. These restaurant chains are corporate chains. See, I don't notice that so much about the mom and pops, because people have a tendency to gravitate toward places that they know and they're familiar with, and they're going to get a good deal, and they want to support these businesses, and they're less, they're not enchanted with the corporations anymore. I mean, they're really blown out by this, and they're visiting shopping malls a lot less. And who occupies the shopping malls? That's number 10. And they're not spending as much money as they are at hair salon, according to Bloomberg. This is a big indicator. You know, people not getting their hair done is an indication of a recession. I'm like, really? And according to the Fed, number 12, U.S. consumers are becoming more concerned about inflation and unemployment. But see, the thing is that people have to have a way to bounce back. And see, when you have somebody like Prophecy Newswatch that puts stuff like this out, people panic, right?
Well, and it does raise that concern, and it should. You know, look at where we are right now. So going back to our selling of debt, between the Social Security Fund and the Federal Reserve, they hold most of the U.S. debt. And again, if they have to continue to support that market, and they're the exclusive buyers because there's nobody else out there, this creates a lot of pressure on the U.S. consumer. But I don't like the idea that there is this falling consumer confidence number. It doesn't help. I mean, again, a high consumer confidence number can really overtake a lot of bad economic news and even a weaker economy, again, because it stimulates activity. If we go the other way and people start turtling down, you know, we're in for some rough rides here. And look at what's happened. I mean, the stock market volatility, even today, it's down. The VIX is down to about 25. And I think that's funny to say it's down to 25 because that's a huge number. But it did go over into the 40s, and I think it tapped 50 at one point. So clearly there are issues out there in the minds of the average Americans that are making them feel uncomfortable about future spending. So now we have the outlook of, okay, more government debt, the economy's slowing down, the consumer's getting less willing to spend money, we need to sell more debt, we need more buyers, foreign countries are becoming less willing to participate in the concept of the US dollar's world reserve status. Where does that leave Americans? And I come back to this and say, if your government will not provide you with sound money, you have an obligation to support your own wealth. Make sure you accumulate something that will give you a leg up if paper money's value continues to be eroded. And those silver dollars or silver half dollars right now, I've got a group of silver half dollars at $14.95. We're doing them in packages of 100 coins, so $1,495 for 100. We do 500, 1,000, 2,000 coins at a time, any quantity at 100 or more. But this is an inexpensive way to hedge your bet against a weaker dollar and see some growth in purchasing power by retaining something that's physical and real and tangible, and you have possession of it.
And these are silver dollars you're talking
Silver
about?
half dollars.
Oh, silver half dollars. Okay. The Franklin halves?
Actually, I've got a lot of Walking Liberty halves right now.
Ooh,
some Franklins,
nice.
some Kennedys, all mixed together. Even though the Walkers are a little bit more technically, we're selling them for the same price as we would any other silver half at today's prices.
Incredible.
At $14.95.
Love it. All right. 1-800-878-2646, the number to call. Fred at uscoincapital.com. Look, if you're really that freaked out about it, call him and let him talk to you. Let him talk to you and tell you what's going on and allay your fears.